Dear Father in heaven, we invite your presence once again on this Sabbath day, and we ask your Holy Spirit to be our teacher and guide. As we open your word together in these sacred hours, we ask for your special presence to be here, to guide our minds, and to direct us in the things that are said, the things that are discussed. Give us strength and the desire and will to follow and obey you. And we ask again for a blessing for each person here. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So this is a summation of a lot of things that have been discussed through the week. But before I get into my lecture, I just want to point you to, not everybody was here, but some of you were here this morning for Trevor's presentation on 23 BC. And I just want to point out something about the dependence upon scholarship over the dependence upon God's Word. And many of the people who attack this message, they depend upon scholarship. They depend upon the opinions of man, really is what it is. And Ellen White makes a statement regarding this Passover. So the Passover that was talked about by Elder Jeff, that's in 2 Chronicles 29, that's in the second month. There was this invitation that was made to Samaria before its destruction. And the Bible, in 2 Chronicles 29 verse 3, I believe it is, it says that this is in the first year of Hezekiah that he does this. But according to the chronology that we work out, Ellen White says that this is about 2 years from the beginning of the siege. And the siege happens, according to Kings, in the 7th year of Hoshea, which is the 4th year of Hezekiah. So either Ellen White is wrong, which she isn't, or she is noticing something that we had already noticed earlier, is that this 16th year of Ahaz has to be the first year of Hezekiah, something scholars do not do. The problem is, and it's rather complicated, but we know that Hoshea reigns 9 years, and that he begins to reign in the 12th year of Ahaz. And so if you were just to take that he begins to reign in the 12th year, and you move this over to try to accommodate for that, you would find that that would move this over, and the whole thing doesn't fall into place. It just doesn't work. It's a very complicated puzzle. But Ellen White is giving insight that she sees this problem and understands that it's 2 years, not 3 years to the siege. And so this to me is a confirmation, and I find this all the time with chronology. The chronologists try to solve problems by saying the Bible is wrong. They're saying that it's a typo or it can't be solved. But inspiration has given us a key, and Ellen White has this insight into so many things in chronology, so many puzzles. And I remember reading M.L. Andreasen. He spent some time with Ellen White in his early years. And he spent time. She gave him permission to look through her writings. And he expected at that time to find that the Desire of Ages was something that was pieced together, for instance, from a bunch of different books. But he found it all written out, almost word for word in her own hand. And he found that her writings had not been altered by man. And this confidence in the spirit of prophecy is something that's lacking in this church. And those that are going to accept this message are going to have to accept inspiration, not just the Bible, but also the spirit of prophecy. So I just wanted to point this out, and this was a wonderful presentation, and I would suggest people who weren't here to watch it later when it's on YouTube. So I'm going to erase it now, but and if you didn't get a picture of it and you want a picture of it, lots of people have taken pictures of it. You can get it from them. So. Now, another point regarding the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, these are inspiration. But we also understand that the lines are given to us by inspiration. And for us, these lines are to guide us. The lines are inspired. Our understanding of them is incomplete, but the waymarks that God has given to us come from inspiration. And in my notes, in my lecture 3, I had a statement from the Spirit of Prophecy which I didn't read, and it's on page 17 of your notes of the book, page 15 of my notes. And of course, we should all be familiar with this. This is the statement from page 971 of the SDA Bible Commentary, Ellen White's comments on Revelation chapter 10 in regard to the seven thunders. And I just want to point out a few little insights that I think are important when we read this, because sometimes we haven't read the spirit of prophecy as carefully as we should. And this has been a little bit of a controversy, because one of the things that has happened in this message, if you've followed it, if you look at old messages, is that what we call the seven thunders, what we labeled as the seven thunders, over time has changed. And that's because God has been revealing to us waymarks that we had not noticed. And so I just want to point out what she says here and how I understand it. And, you can check it and study it yourself. But one of the things she says, right at the beginning of this quote, after these seven thunders uttered their voices, the injunction comes to John as to Daniel in regard to the little book. So after these seven thunders uttered their voices, there's this command that comes to John, just as it did to Daniel in regard to sealing up his book. She says, or the Bible says, but she says too, seal up those things which the seven thunders uttered. So that's what happens in Revelation 10. They're supposed to seal up these seven thunders. And she says, these relate to future events which will be disclosed or unsealed in their order. So the question is, what is the these? Is the these the things which are sealed up, or are they the seven thunders themselves? So I know that maybe some of you just looking at this, trying to understand it as a distinction, may just think, well, the seven thunders are these future events which will be unsealed. Now it's true, the seven thunders are unsealed, or disclosed. These are future events which will be disclosed. But to me, it has to be these future events that are disclosed as the thunders are unsealed. And you'll see what I mean if you go to the next paragraph. She says, the special light given to John, which was expressed in the seven thunders, was a delineation of events which would transpire under the first and second angels' messages. So again, she doesn't say the seven thunders are a delineation of events which would transpire under the first and second angels' messages, but she says the special light given to John, which was expressed in the seven thunders. And so I'm making a distinction here between the seven thunders and the events themselves. In our history, the seven thunders are unsealed. What happened in Millerite history? They did not understand the waymarks that they had just passed through. That is, even though Ellen White talks about these waymarks and that they're fixed and their location has been determined, she determines the location of these waymarks in ways that the Millerites themselves never understood. And one of them we will find here in my notes later. This is on page 23 of the book and 21 of my notes. Wait, that's not the right place. I had it marked and then I lost it. It's on page 35 and 33 of my notes. And this is from the Great Controversy, page 398. And she's talking then about the proclamation of the second advent in this context. And so I'm just going to read here. There's lots of different things that I could bring out. But she says, it was not the proclamation of the second advent that created fanaticism and division. These appeared in the summer of 1844 when Adventists were in a state of doubt and perplexity concerning their real position. So we can see when fanaticism comes in. It comes in during the tarrying time. The preaching of the first angel's message and of the midnight cry tended directly to repress fanaticism and dissension. And those who participated in these solemn movements were in harmony. Their hearts were filled with love for one another and for Jesus, whom they expected soon to see. The one faith, the one blessed hope, lifted them above the control of any human influence and provided and proved a shield against the assaults of Satan. So you can see how this relates to some of the things that we've been studying that have been presented by the other speakers. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, which is from Matthew 25, verse 5 to 7. In the summer of 1844, midway between the time when they had been first thought that the 2300 days would end and the autumn of the year to which it was afterward found that they extended, the message was proclaimed in the very words of Scripture, Behold, the bridegroom cometh. So, when J.N. Loughborough presents Samuel Snow's words where he gives the message, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him on the 10th day of the 7th month, he places that at Exeter, which we had come to understand was the first day of the first month, which was August 15th. What's that? First day of the fifth month, okay, which is August 15th. So I'm getting ahead of myself there. And the 10th day of the 7th month is the date that he's declaring, which is October 22nd. But midway is July 21st, which is the 5th day of the 4th month. And this is where he actually gives this message. And we saw earlier, because he says it's about 3 months that they've been in the tarrying time. And if you were to go to August 15th, that would be 4 months, not about, just 3 months. So we know that the Millerites never really understood that this was where the midnight cry was given. But Ellen White marks it. And so we came to mark it as well. So this is an important point about the message that was unfolding or has been unfolding in our history. So God has been unsealing the seven thunders, and He's been giving us these waymarks. And we've seen here now we're placing a waymark. The loud cry becomes a waymark, just not a period of time. And I don't think we've sorted everything out. But we're doing the best we can under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And God gives us the light we need when we need it. Right? So He's not giving us light in advance of our need. He's giving us that light at the time that we need it. And so sometimes it can be frustrating for an individual trying to follow this message. Because one is there's this advancing light. And if you get a little bit behind, it's hard to catch up. But also, things seem to change. Our understanding changes. But the waymarks aren't changing. It's our understanding of the waymarks that are changing. And I think this is an important point that I always try to emphasize. Now, in the... so I say in my first paragraph, so I kind of have summed it up to some degree, but I'm going to read the paragraph anyway. It is pretty evident, if one takes a good look at the data, that God has been leading this movement. Our main waymarks, the first day of the first month, the 5th day of the 4th month, the first day of the 5th month, and the 10th day of the 7th month, are firmly established. We often refer to them as 9/11, midnight cry, and the Sunday law, in that we see them as repeated in our history. We know that we are just before midnight. Samuel Snow's letters show us that the light that has been unfolding in regard to the prediction before midnight is solid. What's that? That's my summation. That's page 37. It's the beginning of my lecture. Even if we do not yet fully understand everything that is being unfolded. So it's basically what I said, but it's there in a paragraph much more succinct than I said it. Now, Ezekiel, so I want to look at Ezekiel here really briefly, because I've done whole presentations on Ezekiel. And what we're trying to do is understand these reform lines or these waymarks that exist in these different periods. So in Ezekiel, we have way back here in 977 on November 15th, which is the 15th day of the 8th month. On the 15th day of the 8th month, where the disobedient prophet comes to Jeroboam and gives him a prophecy of Josiah. And that prophecy of Josiah is fulfilled not as a time prophecy, but as an event prophecy 350 years later in 627. So here, in the 13th year of Josiah. How do you spell Josiah?
Josiah.
I-A-H. There we go. In the 13th year of Josiah, this prophecy is fulfilled. And this is the year that Jeremiah begins his ministry. And this is where he burns dead men's bones upon the altar in Bethel, where Jeroboam was offering this. Now Jeroboam is acting as, he's a king acting as a priest, offering upon this altar that he has made. It's a false worship. It's one of the golden calves. And this is fulfilled later. Now we know in the 18th year of Josiah, here's a Passover, which is in 622. So we have one of these Passovers. And this is the 18th year of Josiah. So this Passover is referenced in the book of Ezekiel. So I know I'm trying to do this in the briefest way, but I don't want you to get lost as well. So let's just turn to Ezekiel chapter 1, and I'm just going to show you these main points here. In Ezekiel 1, it says, "It came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. And in the 5th day of the month, which is in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest," right? So we have over here, 30 years after this event, pardon me, and that's what the 30 years is referring to. So in 592 BC, we have Ezekiel, and this date is July 21st, and it's the 5th day of the 4th month. So it's not just the 5th day of the 4th month and some other date on our calendar, because every year it's a different date. It happens to be the same date as in Millerite history. And the last date in Ezekiel is October 22, 573, and that date is the 10th day of the 7th month. And this is Ezekiel 1, verse 1 to 2, and this is Ezekiel 40, verse 1. And here it's basically the same scene as in Revelation chapter 11, I believe, where they're measuring the temple, and he's measuring the temple as well, which is a sign of judgment. Yes?
Is this the 19th cycle?
Yeah, this is a Metonic cycle, but I'm not determining the dates by using a Metonic cycle, so don't get confused with that.
It is the same cycle.
It's just the fact that in this year, the first day of the first month is April 19th on the Julian calendar, and the same thing in 573. April 19th is the first day of the first month. Because every 19 years, the pattern generally repeats itself, but not exactly. So you can't use it to determine biblical dates.
Well, what I'm saying is it's on the same 19th, the end
Yes,
of the cycle
yeah.
in the Millerite as it is in the
Yeah, it's on the same. No, it's not on the same as the Millerites, because the Millerites is a Gregorian calendar, and this is a Julian, and they're off by 12 days. So if you tried to line it up, 19 years, you would find it would not align. So yes, so it's not on the same cycle as the dates. But in the Julian calendar, which we use for BC dates, which God has ordained, And I've demonstrated this other ways. One is in the prophecy of the 391 years and 15 days. And you can see that if you use the biblical calendar, Josiah Litch would have arrived at the correct dates. And of course, here we have a prophecy of Josiah, and we can look that this parallels Josiah Litch's prophecy. I'm not going to go into all that detail. But these are predictions and fulfillments that occur, and I'm not even going to go through all of those in Ezekiel, because there's a whole bunch of them. Predictions and fulfillments, which I believe parallel our history. The point that I'm making is I have marked this as the time of the end. And it's the time of the end of a time prophecy. Well, not a time prophecy, but a prophecy. And this, of course, is not a major reform line. It parallels a reform line, but it's not, doesn't have all the aspects or all the things that we see in our major reform lines. And then this Passover of Josiah. So Josiah has this work that he does, and this, we would mark the Passover as, in this case, I was marking it as 9/11. And I'm not saying that that has to be, but this is just how it was done. And the Passover is connected to the first day of the first month, which we saw in Millerite history, especially with the two Passovers on either side of the first day of the first month. But what happens here in Ezekiel 4, verse 4 to 6, which is still in the same time period, so it's on the same day that he's having this vision, he has a time prophecy, that's 390 days he lies on his left side for northern Israel, and for 40 days on his right side for Judah. And this points to 587 because it starts here, the 390 years, goes from 977 to 587.
I think you need to do pen there too.
Yeah, I know.
Last one, last one.
This one's good? Okay. So you can see this is 977, this is 587. If you subtract 390, you get this date. So this is the 390 for Israel. That's much better. And if you go back to here, when the prophecy is fulfilled, 350 years later, which is not a time prophecy, but it happens, we can see when this fulfillment of the prophecy of Josiah. So this is in 1 Kings 13, and this is in 2 Kings 23. This is verse 15 to 18, and this is verse 1 to 5, I believe. So these two prophecies, the giving of the prophecy and the fulfillment, are used as the starting point, and this is 40 years. So from 587 to 627. So this is interesting because he's given us a day for a year, and Adventists have always used this as a day for a year example, but they've never had a starting point and an end point for it. And he's predicting the siege, which is going to be 5 years later. And there's more predictions involved. So there's a whole bunch of predictions that happen when the siege occurs, and I'd love to show them all to you right now, but I can't. The main point is, in understanding this, we're going to have to say that this siege, and there's something else which I should put in. In 597, that's when Jehoiachin is taken captive. And this is the 5th year of his captivity. So we can see that there's basically 5 years here and 5 years over here. There is then, in this history, this is 25 years, because there's 30 years between here and 5 years here. So that's 30 years. And then this other 5 years gives us the 40 years. So that's just kind of a rough way of looking at it. So God has given us this model, and we said this is the time of the net, and this is 9/11. But what is the 5th day of the 4th month? It's midnight, right? And this would have to be the Sunday law, the siege. At least we could look at it that way. And that's what he's predicting. So at midnight, he's predicting not October 22nd, he's predicting this coming siege. So at midnight, he has a prediction. But over here, Jehoiachin is taken captive, and he's referencing this as well. And I have put this before to deal with this, and I was calling this the PBM. Now, it could be wrong, but what happens to Jehoiachin? Zedekiah is set up on the throne. So Jehoiachin reigns for 3 months and 10 days. We know the exact date and everything that Nebuchadnezzar came in and took him captive, because it says in Nebuchadnezzar's writings, or not his, but the chronicle of when all this occurred. And Ezekiel keeps referencing this date of the captivity. For instance, over here, he says this is the 25th year of the captivity, and it's the 14th year since the city was smitten. So, and you can look at that, that's 14 years, this is 25 years. I think it's 25 years, what does he say? Yeah. Oh no, 24th, maybe it's the 24th. I can't, no, it's the 25th. It's the 25th, and if you add it up, it looks like 24. But the reason is, in the years of the captivity, they're counting fall to fall. So if you're on the 10th day of the 7th month, you're in a new year. And that's why it says it's the 25th. So when you just do the math on the surface, it looks off, and everybody's done different things. People, move these things all around. But Ezekiel is counting some events in the years of Zedekiah, which is going spring to spring, and some in the years of Jehoiachin's captivity, which is going fall to fall. And when you correct that, they all fall into place. So, and I don't really want to deal with that. But we have dealt with some of this chronology. Now, in looking at this, we see that we can put our waymarks on here. Now, there's some other stuff that's going to happen after here. So this is the siege. Actually, the destruction of Jerusalem occurs later, and occurs 18 months later, right? Which we all know happened on what date? Okay. So actually, the destruction of Jerusalem happened on the 9th day of the 4th month, but the temple was destroyed. So that was a trick question. The temple was destroyed on the 10th day of the 5th month. So in between here is the first day of the 5th month, which is also recorded in Ezekiel. So this is the city. This is when the city is broken, and this is the temple being destroyed. And this is the same date, so this is in 586. This is the same date in which the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Now, so there's probably, all I'm trying to do say from this is that there's lots that we don't understand about this. So, here I labeled this as the Sunday law, the beginning of the siege. And yet, the destruction of Jerusalem more likely should be the Sunday law, right? If we're going to be consistent. And we know we have sieges with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, a period of 3.5 years. So there's lots here that, all I'm doing is posing some questions. Yes?
My question would be about
Maka.
the PBM, because we've identified the PBM as being Passover. So, and we had you talked about the 2 Passovers, and yet we only have the 1 there. So
yeah, so, that's, I'm not saying any of this is written in stone. But the point here is that there is a separation that is made as well. So these two are connected, and 25 years is connected with the PBM as well. So, and also 30 years. So there's lots here that I'm not saying this is how I understand it. I'm just saying how I looked at it. And I don't think we can necessarily sort this all out right now.
The 25 under the 573, would you just explain that again, please?
This says it's in the 25th year of Jehoiachin's captivity, and 14 years since the city was smitten. This year here, which is the 11th year of Zedekiah, runs spring to spring. This runs fall to fall. And so when he says it's in the 25th year, it's at the beginning of the 25th year. So he's counting it ordinally. And it's the 14th year since the city was smitten. So when you look at it on the surface, the 14 years works fine, right? But the 25 doesn't. And so people have all kinds of problems with that. So they try to move the destruction of Jerusalem over 1 year, and that creates other problems. But what we're saying is that there's 2 different calendars he's using in Ezekiel. And I think this is important. So thank you for bringing up that question, because one of the things that has happened in this message is we came to understand that this represented a spring calendar. And there was a group of people that did not accept that Babylon fell on October 13th, 539, according to a fall-to-fall calendar for 538. When this chart was made, they had January 1st to December 31st in mind when they put 1843. They were not thinking the Jewish year 1843 at the time they made it, because this was made in May of 42, and it was in December of 42 when Miller first proposed that the Jewish year should be counted 1843. As well, this was January 1st to December 31st when they made the chart. But we have come to understand in our history that this is a fall-to-fall calendar. And this is important because many of the people who left this message could not accept this point. And God has used, oddly enough, in our history, the chronology and the spring-to-spring and fall calendar as a dividing point to understanding our message. And so when we go through, so I'm going to erase this. I know it's all in your notes. A much better diagram than I have here. So when we look at our history, and we look at this in comparison to Millerite history, we have had some difficulty in trying to understand these waymarks as we take Millerite history. I remember a couple years ago when we tried to take, once we discovered midnight, how do we put midnight into all the various reform lines that we had established before that didn't have midnight in them, right? And so, you know, we end up with this prediction before midnight, 2014. Now, I propose that Samuel Snow's letters demonstrate that history, but that the first day of the first month, as it relates to Samuel Snow's letters, we shouldn't say that it's, you know, because they start before, this is 9/11, right? And this is midnight. This is the midnight cry. And this is the Sunday law in our understanding of this. So Samuel Snow's letters start here, and I say that it's a separation of the false priests. Originally I was saying it was the separation of the wheat and tares. But we have understood that the separation of the wheat and tares comes in this binding off period between midnight and the midnight cry. Right? So the separation of the false priests is a separate event. And these people leave us, right? Somebody said that they're worse than tares. One is, they're the mockers. So when we looked at Samuel Snow's letters, he had in his May 1st letter, which was not one of his 4 letters dealing with predicting the 10th day of the 7th month, but he does show that the disappointment happened to separate those mockers. And he also repeats that in his 3rd letter, right? So he repeats this idea that there's a separation that has to occur between the false and the true. And in understanding that in Millerite history, we know the parable is the parable of the 10 virgins. So when we come to the first day of the first month, which is April 19th, 1843, that's not a separation of the tares, right? The tares weren't bound off. What's that? 1844. So the end of the Jewish year, 1843, which is April 19th, 1844. And that's not a binding off the tares, right? Because it's not a separation of the foolish and the wise virgins, so it can't be the binding off of the tares. But it is a separation that occurs there, right? And that then, with these 2 Passovers in Samuel Snow's letters, the one that's on April 3rd and the one that's on May 2nd, right? So you got April 3rd That's his first letter republished in the Signs. And then you have it over here on May 2nd. And that's in the Midnight Cry. And this one is on the correct Passover, where he has this chiasm and all that stuff. And this is on the false Passover. So you can see in this history, what is it that's going to be separating the Millerites who accept the Midnight Cry from the Millerites who ended up not accepting the Midnight Cry? What is one of the things, I guess, that separates them? It would be an understanding of chronology. Because this group here, they're not going to, if they accept this as the Passover, and they're not going to accept this as the Passover unless they accept the conclusions about the Karaite calendar, they're going to not accept October 22nd, 1844 as the Day of Atonement. They would say it's September 23rd. So you see what I'm saying here is that there's chronology is important in these histories, in Millerite history and our history. So this understanding of chronology that has been revealed to us about these waymarks comes to play in some way in our history in ways that I don't know if I fully understand yet. Does that make sense? Yes, Maka.
Attempt at making a parallel for our line.
Okay, so make a parallel.
Of the false and the true Passover is 9/11.
Yes.
We also saw that one of the greatest distinctions between those who stayed with the movement and those who left was the light that came from the Revelation 18 angel at 9/11.
Okay, so if you put the Revelation 18 angel here, these people who ended up being mockers here, right? So they come here to the first day of the first month. Miller's prophecies have completely failed. They are now mocking. And I don't know if any of you have experienced that from the people who've left this message, but definitely that's what we find. They're mocking us. So there's a mocking. But so in our history though, so here's the problem. So in our history, this is occurring after 9/11, right? So in a sense, we can't just lay these lines over top of each other like we do other lines. Samuel Snow's letters are a special case, and they are specifically referring to this movement, which is the priests. Does that make sense? So that's the problem, and it's a problem that I think is really not a problem if we think about it. Right? So we can say that Millerite history becomes an example for what's happening to us after 9/11. So we can't then just say that this waymark, the first day of the first month, in our history is the same as Samuel Snow's letters. It has a different purpose. That is, it's not the same reform line. It's a different reform line. So Samuel Snow's letters aren't representing our reform line in exactly the same way. And I think that's acceptable. I don't know if everybody follows what I'm saying. Yes, Allison. Explain which? The which? So this is Passover. This is the false Passover. Yeah, this is the one the Jews kept and the Karaites. And this is the true Passover, according to October 22nd being the 10th day of the 7th month. If you follow this Passover, the 10th day of the 7th month would be September 23rd.
So that May 2nd is not on the chart.
This May 2nd is in 1844. This is Samuel Snow's second letter. Right? So this is what we originally called the PBM, and it's the center of a chiasm. Right? Because Samuel Snow's first letter is written February 16th, and if you go from here to here, this is 2 months and 16 days. And if you go from here to his last letter, which is published 3 days before midnight, this is also 2 months and 16 days. This is the center of a chiasm. And the topic here in his paper was the Passover in 31 AD, describing the chiasm 27 and 34 with the cross in the middle in 31. So the fact that he's dealing with the Passover, on the Passover, and it's the center of a chiasm, and the reason he's placing the Passover here is to show this chiasm in 3.5 years, indicates that this is by design. Can't be by accident. Yes, Maka?
If I understand what you're saying correctly, are you saying that the letters themselves are teaching us about this division that takes place with the markers, but we can't take all the dates, but this particular one that's being marked out, May 2nd, is one that we can plug into our life?
Yes, in a sense, this May 2nd, which is the center of this chiasm, it's on this side of the first day of the first month. Okay? So if you want to do this correctly, this is 2014 where we mark the separation occurring. Does that make sense? Right? So we don't be troubled by the fact that Samuel Snow's increase of light occurs before the first day of the first month, which is 9/11, because this is really all symbolizing this date. Does that make sense? Yes, Allison.
Showing a separation of the markers then.
Right, so the false priests are being separated.
So on our line, we understand it's 2012, not 2014 when it first began. So I'm just wondering, is that there?
2012? Yeah, that's what... So is it 2012? Is it 2014? We have the 126 shekels that comes to 2014, and we have the 151 shekels that goes to 2014, and we understand that that's when it was visibly manifest. Even though, yes, it began before there, how many of you in 2012 knew that these ministries were in opposition? When did you hear about it? It was in 2014. So that's why we would mark 2014, right? Sure, we could even mark it earlier. Elder Jeff said something about 2008, right? So obviously there's a rebellion. And we see this in things like the 723 BC, where there's all this progression of events, but what's the event that marks it? It's Hoshea being taken captive, right? So we have these dates. God marks dates in history differently sometimes than historians do, right? The fall of Turkey, August 11th, 1840. Well, Turkey still survived until the 1920s, right? So if you're going to defend August 11th, 1840, you need to understand what the prophecy is referring to. It's not referring to the final end of Turkey as a nation. It has to do with its subjugation or its submission to the 4 Christian nations, right? Which wasn't even understood necessarily by Josiah Litch when he made the prediction. He wasn't understanding what was going to happen. Yes?
I hesitate to ask this question because I don't want to get you off point, but you're answering another question. The false Passover on April 3rd, if I'm understanding you right, you're wanting us to understand that in our history post 9/11.
Yes.
But I'm wondering why it can't be pre 9/11. There was a separation, a specific separation at 9/11 of mockers too.
Yes.
That's the end of the resistance of the conference and self-supporting work.
Mm-hmm. So Elder Jeff's making an interesting point. So he says, why can't I look at this as occurring before 9/11? Because in our history, we have separations that occur at 9/11, and even separations that occur earlier, right? 1989, we could even, look at in a certain way. And we could then say, well, this is referring to that type of separation. And I don't necessarily have problems with that. It's just that I think that this whole overall structure is pointing to this being the center, and it's over on this side. And I think that's why God has it as a chiasm, placing this as the center of this after 9/11, because it was something I struggled with. So that was my solution. Maybe your solution also works. But the other thing is, we also know there's these 3 days before midnight, which is a symbol of the PBM, and this whole structure is designed to end at the center of the chiasm between the first day of the first month and the 10th day of the 7th month. So this chiastic structure doesn't just point to here, but it also shows that this is aiming to this point and I put that in the wrong spot. Somebody should have corrected me on that. This should be 3 days before midnight here. There we go. So this is the July 18th letter. So the center is over here. 2 months and 16 days. There, that's better. So I'm glad I noticed that before the video's over. So this is the July 18th letter, which is the last letter published. And I went through all these. If you didn't see the video, you can watch it. But the point is, the center of this chiasm is then, and I got this still wrong. So the center of the chiasm is here. It's lopsided. I hate things that are lopsided, but there we go. So it's pointing to this date, May 2nd. So this 2 months and 16 days, which is his first letter. This is the time of his first letter to his second letter. And then this is the second, there's a third, and then there's the fourth. And this fourth ends there. So the point is, it's pointing to May 2nd as the center of a chiasm, which I say would align up with 2014 in our history. But there could be other solutions. Yes, Maka?
When we're talking about our history and the progression of
Mm-hmm.
light from Israel, and especially Ezekiel, we've been adding waymarks to our line. We started with, actually I'll start a little more recent history. We started with Ezra 9, and they gave us the first day of the first month, the first day of the fifth month.
Right, so in 2013, we ended up first recognizing this date. Yeah.
Okay, and then Ezekiel, the first chapter of Ezekiel gave us that date there, fifth day of the fourth month.
Yeah.
It's significant because it was marking midnight for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, if somebody correct me, I think we understood the fifth day of the fourth month first, and then we found it in Ezekiel later.
Yes, but it
Yeah.
confirmed that for us.
Yes, it
We
confirmed
got
it.
as an experience that we're supposed to have at
Yeah.
midnight. And then God confirmed it by giving us
Yes.
Ezekiel's experience.
Okay.
And then to add to that, he gave us May 2nd, which was the Passover, which we're saying is the prediction before midnight.
Right.
So these are events that take place in their order. And that's why April 3rd doesn't fit on our line, just to answer Jeff's question.
Yeah, so there are events that are going to be disclosed in their order, and they would be events, well, this ends, yeah, I don't know if I fully agree that that's a good argument, because this is still in, yeah, you're saying it has to be in our history.
It has to be on this side of 9/11
Yeah.
because we're marking an experience as we're walking along the
Yeah.
way. And before midnight, at Passover, for example, I'm going to talk about this later in my talk, but at Passover, Christ gives the prediction before midnight.
Right.
That experience happens. So there's an order, there's an experience as these events are taking place. That's why Passover cannot be on the other side of 9/11.
Right, yeah. So the argument is that because in our history these events are being disclosed in their order, this Passover, which is before, has to be represented after 9/11. And so it's an argument to say that all of this, of Samuel Snow's letters, really centers here to here, in the second half of the chiasm. The first half of the chiasm, even though it appears to be before 9/11, really belongs to events after 9/11. So it's very, very helpful for me having this discussion and all the light that has been coming upon our message. One is organization.
Why is 9/11 the starting point for you and her? I didn't follow her logic, or your logic.
For the events, for the waymark. So Elder Jeff is probably questioning, well, why are we going to 9/11 that the waymarks are being... Because we have waymarks that exist here, right?
So did the Millerites.
Yeah, and so did the Millerites. So why would you argue that it has to be after 9/11 that the events are being disclosed in their order?
Especially in reference to Seven Thunders. So
Yeah, the Seven Thunders.
At the time of the end.
Yeah, because, yeah, the Seven Thunders would start at the time of the end. Now, that would be 1798 in Millerite history, 1989 in our history.
Simply because it's the first day of the first time.
Okay, well, I don't know if that's a good reason. But Be that as it may, whether one is right or the other is right, what we do know is that this is, if we're going to talk about the prediction before midnight as being connected with Samuel Snow's letters, we can place the center of that chiasm here after 9/11. And that's the main point. However we want to understand it, whether there's going to be light in looking at it the way Elder Jeff does or the way Maka does, I don't know. But I do know that that is at least something that's clear and can deal with the objections that somehow I'm placing this before 9/11.
I'm not looking at, I'm following your lead. All I'm saying is what you said earlier about the production of mockers, that at 9/11 there was a class from the Adventist Conference Brethren and self-supporting that are genuinely, they come on the scene at 9/11 as mockers.
Yeah.
So you were placing them back in April 3rd.
No, I'm placing them at 9/11. April 3rd, what happens at April 3rd is those people, once you get to the first day of the first month, they have not accepted this Passover yet, so they begin mocking here.
They're holding on to their understanding pre-9/11.
Right. Yes.
That's the conference
Okay.
supporting guys.
Right, so the conference self-supporting guys, there, which is what I would think that the 500,000 Millerites are symbolizing, they're holding on to their pre-existing knowledge of the calendar and so forth. They're holding on to, March 21st is the end of the Jewish year. They might not even accept. Some of them might briefly accept, some concepts that would point to this. But once they get to the end of Miller's prophecies, many of them claim they never actually believed it. Right? So the mocking begins here. But they're holding on to a past understanding. This increase of light that's coming here in this history is not understood. But the point is, this is Samuel Snow. Samuel Snow, in my understanding, isn't really here in our history. He's not before 9/11. He comes after. Right? Why? See, Elder Jeff always asks me these questions, like why? Well, we have Miller here, right, before 9/11. And so we have that after 9/11, we have this new increase of light, which deals with the prediction before midnight. And that new light is not a single person. We're not looking for a single person to be Samuel Snow. I have said that I believe that the priests are symbolized by Samuel Snow. So this movement specifically is Samuel Snow, at least not in his apostasy later on, but in his giving the message at midnight. Right? And he also gives a prediction before midnight in his letters themselves. But here he's publicly, as a person, proclaiming it. And so I'm saying that symbolizes the work of the priests right now. So why is always a good question, but not always an easy one to answer. But we do need to think about these things. And that's the point that I'm trying to make in looking at these histories.
And there was nothing significant about April or February 16, the first letter he wrote?
There was no significant date except the fact that he wrote a letter here.
And it had nothing to do with the rest of the history?
With what?
The rest of the history.
The rest of the history from
Yeah. It starts the chiasm. That's all it does. I mean, obviously, he writes the letter, he republishes it, or he publishes it the first time. Not everybody, I guess, got this on February 22nd, which is the third day of the 12th Jewish month preceding this year, the first day of the first month being April 19th. But the Jews, in this history, they just have April 3rd as the Passover. If this is the third day of the 12th month, this is the Passover. But this is the history in Ezra chapter 6, where they dedicate the temple, and then 40 days later they have a Passover, right? So this connects here in, oh, pardon me, I shouldn't say this. I'm kind of getting mixed up. So here, there is a Passover. There's a Theodore in here, I forgot about, because I don't have it drawn in. So this is 40 days later in Millerite history. But the point is that this is the republication of his letter. So he writes it on the date of the dedication of the temple, and then it's republished on the Passover. And that parallels 515 BC. So you'd have to watch the lecture on that. But the point is, in this year, in 1844, the Passover doesn't follow 40 days later. It follows 70 days later. Right? So it's different in that year than it is in 515 BC. So, hopefully I got you thinking about this. But one of the things I find is, as I continue to look at the light that's unfolding in this message, it continues to make the past light shine brighter. The things that we didn't understand fully, when we examine them on the new light, they are now clearer, not less clear. We don't end up rejecting established truths, we end up understanding them. And this is an important point, because Ellen White makes the statement that all new light is an unfolding of old truths. And that any new light will not reject the old. Those that reject the new have never understood the old.
Like
And-
bringing a microscope or binoculars into focus.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find this to be true, that many of the people who have not accepted the advancing light, when you look at their understanding of the old light, it's insufficient. They didn't really even understand it in the first place. They were holding on, and that's why they don't accept the advancing light, because they don't understand the old. So we need to understand this light. If we're accepting the advancing light as we study, we will clearly understand what God has revealed previously. We're not going to have a fuzzier understanding. And I know initially sometimes new light can be very challenging. And partly it's because we haven't really understood the old light yet. We're kind of like, well, I don't even understand, the reform lines, and now we got this new complexity added. So what do I do? But I think that what we need to do is study and pray and follow the light that shines all along the path from the midnight cry. And it's the unfolding of the light of the midnight cry that's going to make all these truths, not just the truths in this message shine brighter, but even the truths of Adventism that we first accepted years ago, it makes them shine brighter. And it establishes them more firmly. And if Seventh-day Adventists could see what we see, they would see this. But the point is, they won't even look, many of them. Now, I believe that there's a way to reach some of them, and obviously we can't judge their hearts. There are some people, they're being held back by others. And one of the things we do, Brother Trevor presented 723 BC in a much more detailed way than probably any of us had looked at it before. And we probably don't remember anything of what he said. But the thing is, we need to study these things in more detail, because we have to have an answer to people who are looking for light and are being hindered by others.
Amen.
And sometimes it's not a really complicated presentation on chronology. Believe me, it's not always the answer. Sometimes it's very simple things that's going to reach a person. But there are some people, they need a solid answer, and if we can't give it to them, if we don't have a reason, that person may not accept the truth. So I think it's amazing what God is doing right now in this message. Sometimes it can be discouraging. We can see that there's all these people leaving, friends of ours, for years and years and years, now becoming mockers, and we think, well, why is this happening? And the truth becomes sometimes very oppressive. If you know what I mean. I think all of you understand what I mean. It's a huge burden, not just to understand it, but to even share it with others. How do I do this? And especially as we get more and more divorced from the thinking in Adventism, and somebody, as Elder Jeff said, if somebody's watching one of these videos, what are they talking about? Right? They have no idea. And people will ask me questions on Facebook, What does it mean that after 2014 there's a gathering happening and you can do time setting during a gathering? How do you answer that question to somebody who doesn't understand reform lines? And it's almost an impossible question to ask. Now, of course, the person asking it probably has no real sincere desire to know the truth, but other people are watching. So you still sometimes have to answer that question in a way that can make sense. So thanks for your attention and for your thought. And
Can I ask one more question?
yes, okay.
Take me just a second and put it in place, but at the beginning you started with the passage from the Seven Thunders. And if I'm understanding what you were trying to share with us from the Seven Thunders is that at the end of the world, before probation closes, the Seven Thunders that were sealed up is to be opened up to God's people. And I think what I'm understanding you say by you're going through that passage is that some of us think that when the Seven Thunders was opened up here at the end of the world, that it portrayed the Millerite history with 7 primary waymarks, and we've seen those waymarks. Those waymarks match our history, but what you're saying is that what gets opened up in the Seven Thunders is a development of waymarks over a period of time that we have to follow on, not just a singular illustration of Millerite history that is the pattern for us, and there's no further development of it. Is that what I'm understanding you saying?
Yeah. So Elder Jeff is saying that he understands me that in regard to the Seven Thunders, that instead of just 7 thunders were revealed to us about Millerite history and we understood them, but that there's something that's being unsealed in our history, and it's helping us understand the waymarks in Millerite history better, because we actually see more waymarks, but also in our history, it's the unfolding of those waymarks, which are going to be disclosed in their order. And we're seeing them now in their order. Not that they're revealed, the time of the end's revealed first and the next one's revealed first, because that's not how they were unfolded in our understanding of Millerite history. So I think this is, it's an important point, and it may seem like a fine distinction on some levels, but I think it's important as we get this development of light, that we're seeing that God is unsealing the 7 thunders, and He's revealing to us not just the placement of the waymarks, but the significance of them, both in Millerite history and in our history. And that's clearly evident as we, look at what has happened over the last, number of years, but even in the last, year and a half or 2 years specifically, because I think one of the things that happened a couple of years ago is we realized we didn't understand the waymarks at all. That when we really started to look at our understanding of the waymarks, there was so much disagreement, and that's because we had the waymarks, but we didn't know what they all meant. And I think that's what's happening now, is we're understanding much more clearly. I think Parminder has placed the idea that the waymarks are inspired, the lines are inspired, but our understanding of them is insufficient. It has to be corrected. So even though we came to an understanding of why something should be in a certain place and what it means, our understanding of that may have to change. But the waymark itself is inspired. It's ordained by God. He placed them there. And that's why I focused a little bit on the fact that the Millerites got correct dates without understanding things 100% correctly. Because God was placing those dates there specifically for a purpose. And so that's all I have to say. So thanks. Let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for this Sabbath day and for the fellowship that we can have here, not just with one another, but with you. That your Spirit's presence here can impress us, impress our hearts and our minds, that you can give us clear understanding of things that we struggle over. As I've seen, Ezekiel had most of his visions on the Sabbath day. John was given his vision in Revelation on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is such a precious time when you come close to us. We just ask, Lord, that we can honor this time, that we can feel your presence, and that we cannot do anything that will chase it away. Thank you now for hearing us, and be with us through the rest of this day in all of our meetings, in all of our deportment. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.